Today, we're going to be talking to MSNBC chief correspondent Ali Velshi, host of Velshi, and also author of the new book, Small Acts of Courage, A Legacy of Endurance and the Fight for Democracy. So great to have you on. I appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
So, to start with, I have so many areas of history that I want to talk to you about in terms of these acts of courage. But your family history is an interesting one that really ties in very much with the subject matter of the book. Can you just give people who may not be familiar with you a little bit of your family background?
Yeah, my family left India in the late 1800s. Like everybody in the Indian diaspora today, it was a time of sort of drought and poverty and struggle in India. So they went to where Indians could go, which was typically not Europe or North America. In the case of my family, they went from the west of India, from Bombay to South Africa. They saw that as a land of great opportunity, but it turned out that it was a land of, remarkable sort of oppression and racism, and some bad things were happening there. That's where my family linked up with Gandhi, also from the same part of India that my family was from, but that wasn't how they met up. They shared an accountant in South Africa, and that's how my great grandfather and Gandhi came to be friends. Gandhi asked my great grandfather if he would let my grandfather, who was 7 years old at the time, join this new commune that he was starting, this new ashram that he was starting to sort of prepare people for this fight against apartheid. And so that's sort of the beginning of what happened. My family became anti-apartheid activists, which hurt them a great deal in business and in their life in South Africa. They left to live in a more democratic place. They got to Kenya, where they got to see the birth of democracy in that country, the transition from colonialism to democracy. They lived there for a while, but they really wanted a more full experience for democracy, and it ended up in Canada, where I grew up. And they jumped into civil society and politics with both feet. And in doing so, and in consuming the news to become better at that, I grew up thinking the news was really, really important. And that's how I got influenced into doing what I do today. And so that's sort of my family's connection, and the degree to which that quest for democracy kept moving everybody just a little farther ahead each time.
Yeah, my so I was born in Argentina and came to the US, and like you, news and politics was just always part of the discussion. And
Right.
just like you, I think it's probably what set me on this path. To what degree, if any, and I assume that the answer is yes to some degree, to what degree do you think that your status as, your family moved around and ultimately you grew up in Canada? Do you think this still affects you today, and kind of in what ways?
I think a few things affect me given my family's migration. First of all, Canada is important to how that happened, because uh, Canada just has a different view of immigration. Canada
Hmm.
sees immigration as having saved it from being a provincial former colony into a country that punches above its weight. So to this very day, the Canadian impression of immigration is different than the American impression of immigration. In both countries, the birth rate is such that it won't replace workers. Both countries really need immigrants.
Yes.
America is still the number one target for immigrants, no matter where they're from. America is developing a bit of a reputation about not digging immigrants so much because of some of the language that's used by Donald Trump, but it sort of just makes its way into our language, the way we talk about migrants and undocumented people. It makes us sound not like the most compassionate people.
Mm.
But my argument is that immigration is an imperative. It's an economic imperative. It's a social imperative. It's a population imperative. Forget about thinking about it as charity, and forget about thinking about it as rooted in crime and security, and perhaps we do better. So that's one thing. Canada had universal health care. That influences my view on the fact that everybody should have universal health care, because most developed countries, except America, do have universal health care. And democracy really embraced my family as I grew up in Canada. So I have grown up with the idea that democracy is worth fighting for, pluralism is worth fighting for, politics is not all crooked and bad. But I love America. I mean, this is a country that not only do I love, but I'm interested in fighting for its democratic survival, which to some people will sound like criticism of America, because that's the age we live in, that when you criticize governments, people think you criticize countries and their people. That's not true.
Mm.
I love this country. I think it is the greatest hope for the world. and I'm enthused by it. But my Canadian experience kind of helps me say, hey, how do we do this better?
I've talked to my audience about how my approach to a lot of this social change is incrementalist rather than accelerationist. And supporting that is that when I look back at what I think are three of the greatest eras of positive change in American history, you've got the Progressive Era, the New Deal era, and the Civil Rights Movement. And as
Correct.
I study those, and I look at the things that happened in the 5, 10, and 15 years before these periods of change, I see a lot of small wins, including who ended up on the Supreme Court and why. Well, you sometimes have to go back a little bit to get to the
Yeah.
previous election, or what were committees in the House and Senate working on at that time that may have laid the groundwork, as an example. So studying this has led me to take more of a Ted Kennedy type incremental rather than accelerationist approach. When you talk about small acts of courage, the language sounds incrementalist in the same way, but I don't want to read that into it if that's not actually your perspective. So I'm curious.
I love that you did read that into it, and I think that partially because of the fact that you studied that, that's how you see it, and that's what is happening with this book when people read it. They're sort of relating their own experiences or their own academic lens to it. I don't think you're wrong. My larger point is quite connected to yours, and that is, don't worry if everything you're aiming to do doesn't succeed. In the case of my family, in the case of my grandfather, who was Gandhi's student, he died at the age of 58 after the government in South Africa had it with his and our families agitating about apartheid. Uh, he died thinking it all failed. Gandhi left South Africa, by the way, in 1913, thinking it all failed. My grandfather would never have known that my family would live in two other democratic countries. He just wanted some change for their situation in South Africa. He wasn't looking for the whole enchilada. But he influenced a family that moved to other countries, saw democracy born, participated in democracy. My father became the first Muslim and South Asian elected to major office in Canada.
Mm.
My grandfather could have never imagined that his son would do that. My mother and my sister were both candidates for political office in Canada. I am a journalist in America. I can't imagine he knew that I would ever end up in America, or that I'd be a journalist, or that I'd be writing this book or talking to you. So my point is that he planted seeds, the fruit of which he never enjoyed, the shade of which he never enjoyed, but someone will. You might inspire someone, you might cause someone to get the education that they needed to better themselves. My view is, if you do the right thing, if you have a North Star and you do the right thing, it doesn't matter whether you're the one who actually changes or tips it over into success. It just matters that you're doing the right thing and moving in the right direction, because collectively that does work. Then there are moments, as you described, that are really big, and you can be in those moments. But whether you are or you aren't, if we are in the incremental stage right now, you and I are both in the arena. Every American citizen is in the arena. We're in the fight. And when something massive changes 5 or 10 years down the road as a result of these incremental matters, we can say we were there when it started, or we were there when it was growing, or we were there when it was happening.
When it comes to the journalism aspect of this and the kind of place and role that journalism have had over time in telling us about the fact that some of these things are going on, but also in accurately reporting the genesis of a lot of this stuff. For
Yeah.
example, Trump, in a sense, was the culmination of a process I think probably started in the 50s, late 50s, with the civil rights era, which led to a whole bunch of other different things. Newt Gingrich and the radicalization of the House of Representatives in 94 plays a role. Bush, Obama, it's this whole long thing.
Yeah.
And so in the media space, there's often a question about, like, what is the packaged story that we can tell to inform as best as possible, sometimes limited by the format of the programs that we're producing. But it seems like journalism has a big role in shaping our understanding of how we got to where we are. Fair to say?
I think it's the most important thing to say. In fact, I think without context, politics is horse race, and it doesn't make sense to people. Why is this happening now? When you look at literally everything that's happening now, pick anything out of a hat that's going on in today's news, there is historical context for it. That doesn't justify it, doesn't make it right, or doesn't make it wrong. It just tells you that virtually nothing comes out of thin air, whether it's college protests or the way the Republican Party is going, the fact that people have thought that the next election is the most important election in American history at different times in American history, although this one might be, the concept of the erosion of democracy, both in the United States and around the world. This stuff doesn't come out of nowhere. The stuff that Donald Trump says at his speeches about immigrants being vermin, he didn't invent that stuff at all. So you're right. I think the context is important. I think part of it starts with understanding that starting points and starting places for belligerents in conflicts are different, and they can be valid. So whether you're talking about Israel, Palestine, when I was in Iran covering the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, every American thought Iran went wrong in 1979 with the revolution, and every Iranian thinks Iran went wrong in 1953 when America intervened and stopped its democratic election of a prime minister who was going to nationalize the oil. Both are true. Both can be true, or at least there are elements of both that are true. But how do you have a discussion with somebody who doesn't share your view on something when you don't understand the reason they think about this is because of many things that happened before, or examples that they've got, or history that they've got, or family history that they've got. So I think that the danger in politics right now is it is very much a who's up and who's down situation. I think well curated, well researched, accurate, and reliable information about why we are where we are in a lot of these situations that we find ourselves in would help our viewers understand how to have that discussion with other people, how to prepare themselves to vote, and how to think about being participants in a fraught democratic society.
On that note, and this will be kind of our last general topic. You have been doing this longer than I have, and so you were in media during the transition into podcasting, YouTube, high-speed internet that allows the sharing rapidly of viral moments, Twitter, the entire thing. My presence was created by that, and so it went directly to that, whereas you kind of have seen the before, the during, and then the now. How would you assess the net effect of all of this stuff in terms of the ability to disseminate accurate information, the difficulty in wading through the stuff that's not so good, the democratization, for better or worse, of a greater diversity of voices, some of which happen to be vile and disgusting? Do you have some feeling about the net good, bad of it?
Yeah, and you've really framed that very well. Let's start with the last part. The democratization of voices is good. That there's no question. There's a lot of garbage out there.
Mm-hmm.
And back when there were 3 networks and 2 national news magazines and things like that, your ability to curate garbage out,
Yep.
vile, violent, anti-democratic, racist garbage was simpler. But you also curated a lot of other stuff out that is uncomfortable. It's not vile, racist, obnoxious, sexist, misogynistic garbage, but it's political views that are not well thought out. And they're in our mix. I think the net of that remains positive, but I think we have to think about how we regulate that. And I don't mean regulate with a capital R as government. I mean as society, as media organizations. How do we deal with the fact that I can curate my information such that it comes from people who only share or reinforce my views? So that's unhealthy for me. That's unhealthy for society. There's more of it. And I just think it's a matter of how do we figure it out? It's like if there are more cars, you figure out a better transit system, or you figure out a better highway system. If there are more people, you don't blame the people who don't have a place to stay. You think that you've got a housing problem and you try and fix that. So I think we have an infrastructure problem, that this has moved faster than we could think about, but it's much better. It's much better that there are people who can write things and get them published without having to have a deal with a distribution company or work for a major corporation to get things out there. And I will say a lot of the important messages that exist today are counter to media control and ownership by corporate interests. There are just some things that we need to discuss that some corporate interests would not have you discuss. I'm grateful it doesn't apply to me, and that my corporate bosses don't have don't put the thumb on any scale about what I'm talking about. But the fact is, If I want to talk about how cutting the cord's better than keeping cable, I happen to work for a cable company.
Right.
If I want to talk about things that are contrary to the regulations that my employers don't want, I have to have the freedom to talk about that. So I think net, it's better to have more out there than less. I think we've got to learn how to engage in that dialogue. I think we've got to decide that we're a pluralistic people so we can manage different opinions. And we've got to figure out as a media infrastructure how to help people be critical thinkers about what it is we put out there and how it is they consume it. This is heavy lifting, but I'd sooner take this than go back to narrowing our band of where we get our information from.
Well, I'm with you on that because my show wouldn't exist if that was the case.
Right.
We've been talking in part about Ali Velshi's new book, Small Acts of Courage, A Legacy of Endurance in the Fight for Democracy. Thanks for your time and congratulations on the book.
It is my absolute pleasure. Thank you.